the Sony A5000, a Sony APS-C mirrorless camera from 2014 that released for about $550 new. It came with a 20 megapixel APS-C sensor, an extremely tiny body, and 1080 30p video recording. When released, it wasn't one of Sony's highest-end cameras. It was always an entry to kind of mid-range camera that was made to compete with the likes of the Canon T5i or Nikon D3300. And I don't know, something from, Pentax or something. This camera, however, was mirrorless and extremely tiny. But like many Sony cameras, it packed a hell of a bunch in its tiny body and had a ton of raw power for the price. However, also like Sony cameras, sometimes this raw power was extremely difficult to actually use. Today, this camera can be had for about $200 used. So we'll use this in combination with some cheap vintage lenses to see if it's actually worth the price, or if this is just a piece of ancient fiddly mirrorless technology today. One thing I've learned from using so many cameras since I started shooting photos and video is that ease of use really is one of the most important aspects of a camera. If it's not easy to change your settings, go through the menus, or just in general shoot, you're not going to unlock the full capabilities of the camera, or at the very least, you're just not going to like the camera. This is a major issue with cameras this small. If you want a little camera with a good sensor to take around town and snap a few photos here and there on aperture priority, then this could potentially be the perfect camera for you. However, if you want a budget piece of proper gear for more serious photography or videography, the answer to if this is a great camera is going to really depend a lot. This is why I'm starting with ease of use. Like I've already mentioned, this camera really is small as hell. Like, look at this little guy. He's smaller than my kitten. Well, I mean, this video was written a long time ago, so now she's a cat, so this comparison isn't really valid, but whatever. It's a small camera, you get the point. This means there really aren't very many buttons at all on the whole thing. Normally on a DSLR or pro mirrorless camera, you have a dial or switch or chalkboard or something to adjust pretty much every setting you'd ever need. From basics like shutter speed, ISO, aperture, to things like image quality, frame rates, resolutions, etc. But on this camera, you have a dial. That's right. You got a dial, you got one of them. And like two other buttons, but those aren't important. A whole singular dial. But the screen is flippity, so you can vlog if you want to go back to 2014, I guess. But this does make actually using the camera a bit of a challenge. To change the ISO, you can't just use the main dial and have a second and third for shutter and aperture. You have one dial for all of them. But if you have an old manual lens like I'm using, you can actually adjust the aperture manually on the lens, leaving one extra space for something else you want to adjust. For other things like focus magnification, you're going to have some difficulty depending on how you want to use the four directions of the dial. If you're like me and like to have specific buttons for zebras, focus magnification, frame rate, peaking, everything, this camera will probably be a struggle for you to use as an A cam. As a B cam, it actually is pretty good. You can take more time to get all your settings right than just leave it and let it record. For its 30-minute record limit, that is. Or until the battery runs out. Yay, Sony. Oh, and you have to deal with old Sony menus. Yay, Sony. Now that all that complaining about Sony before the A7 III came out is over, actually using the camera can be a significantly different situation. And let me tell you, it's actually worse to use. I mean, it's not that bad, but it has a lot of features that other entry-level cameras at the time, and even now, didn't have. Things like zebras and peaking, two things my Canon 80D doesn't have. So in some cases, this actually makes up for the lack of dials and switches, buttons, whatever. You could just use peaking for manual lenses, and most of the time, usually, hopefully, you'll get the focus pretty much spot on. And if you hate yourself, you can just leave zebras on all the time. Or maybe, I don't know, I'm just weird. I don't know. Either way, the zebras will be useful in this camera because it lacks any sort of flat color profile for video and doesn't have great dynamic range. So this camera isn't extremely difficult to use day to day for photo or video. It's just a different experience that is more geared towards someone who wants to just take quick photos with mostly auto settings and, well, vlogging. This really is a vlogging camera, but I don't do that, so we're just going to pretend like this doesn't exist. And we're going to forget the Panasonic G7 exists too while we're at it. Speaking of the Panasonic G7 though, sensors. The sensor of this camera and the low price point are the main draws to it and why I was actually interested in it. If you get around the ease of use issues and the menus and the battery life, this camera, while it has an old sensor, really can actually pack a punch. For photos, it can take JPEG and RAW photos with decent dynamic range and resolution. It records somewhat decent 1080p video. While it lacks a 60p option, it should still be adequate for, honestly, most YouTube channels. It lacks 4K, the dynamic range isn't great, and there are no flat color profiles. You just get basic stuff like standard, landscape, OnlyFans, portrait, just the regular consumer profiles, nothing like professional or anything you'd want in a serious video camera. You can use the neutral picture profile, but the low 24 megabit per second bit rate really hinders any chances you have it color grading your footage. I tried, it doesn't look good, but I don't know. If you're more focused on video, saving up for the Panasonic G7 will really save you a lot of struggles and give you significantly better video quality with the sacrifice of depth of field and maybe a little bit of photo quality. But at the very least, the 1080p is somewhat sharp and can shoot pretty decent video at up to about 800 ISO, leaving you with a pretty solid photo and video camera for about $200 used. But that is only if you're okay using old manual lenses. This is because Sony zoom lenses are known to be incredibly expensive, and they really only have a few options between the highest end and the basic kit. This is because Sony lenses are known to be incredibly expensive, and they have very few options between the highest end and just the basic kit lenses that come with your cameras. If you just want a basic camera, you could just get this with the kit lens for under $300. A great way to enter the Sony ecosystem and start building up lenses. Or in my situation, get this lens for $200 and maybe a vintage lens or two. You know, they can range anywhere from $20 to $50. This one right here was about $20. And with that, you can actually have a pretty reasonable budget camera that can shoot really good photos and video, in my opinion. So, okay. In the end, is it a good camera? In my opinion, yeah. It's a pretty good sensor and a mediocre at best body, but with an amazing price point. If you're looking for a more video-focused camera though, I really cannot suggest the Panasonic G7 more. This really is a more photo-focused camera, and the video quality is nowhere near the Panasonic G7. If you want this to be a starter video camera for really cheap, or just a B-cam to another Sony camera you have, like the A6300, it really is a great deal with manual primes. But if you need modern glass with AF, it's going to be a struggle to find affordable lenses, especially zoom lenses. Sigma has their Sony primes, which are excellent and can be an extremely affordable way to build up a Sony prime kit, so you can update something like the A63 or A6500. But if you want a zoom lens off the bat that isn't the kit that came with this one, you're really going to struggle to find good deals. But besides that, this really is a great deal, and I really highly suggest anyone who's actually looking into getting a budget camera to consider this one. Just don't get your hopes up on the Sony ecosystem. It will almost always be a premium camera brand and carry the premium price tag, leaving it out of reach for most people who don't yet make any money from their camera gear. But other than that, it's a pretty good camera. I don't know. But other than that, this really is a great camera if you're looking for a photo camera or if you're just getting into videography. It's extremely cheap, has decent quality, and it's mirrorless, so you can throw pretty much any lens on this thing if you want. I mean, I have like 3 different lens manufacturers here from like 50, 100 years ago or something, and they all work just fine. So there you go. But thank you guys for watching. Hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you next time.